This is the story of a city whose accent is so distinctive, so rapid fire, so utterly bewildering to outsiders, that Hollywood studios literally redubbed an entire film rather than trust American audiences to understand what was being said. The Glaswegian accent and dialect, belonging to Glasgow, Scotland's largest city, home to over 1.7 million people, is what many consider the most impenetrable in the English-speaking world. It starts with the moment that turned this into a global conversation. In 1996, director Danny Boyle released Trainspotting, based on Irvine Welsh's novel of the same name. A gritty, electrifying film set in Scotland that became an instant cultural phenomenon. But when the Weinstein brothers prepared to distribute it across North America, they had a problem. American test audiences couldn't understand what the characters were saying. So the first 20 minutes of the film were redubbed, subtitles were added during key scenes, and in certain cases words were swapped entirely. Bird became girl, Ken became no, and skag became smack. As Danny Boyle later admitted, the Weinsteins didn't bother redubbing it in New York or LA because they knew the filmmakers would be there on the press tour and would notice. But everywhere else, dubbed into American. And here's the thing, Trainspotting wasn't even set in Glasgow, it was set in Edinburgh. The Glaswegian accent is considered significantly harder to parse than its Eastern Scottish cousin. So what is it about the way Glaswegians speak that causes such total communication breakdown? To understand that, you need to understand what the Glasgow dialect actually is. Fondly known as the patter, Glaswegian isn't just a Scottish accent with the volume turned up. It's a distinct linguistic variety shaped by centuries of migration and cultural collision, what sociolinguists would call a contact dialect, formed at the intersection of multiple language traditions. Its roots draw from Northern English, Lowland Scots, and the Ullans dialect, brought over by Northern Irish immigrants who poured it into the Clydeside shipyards along the River Clyde during the Industrial Revolution. Highland Scots migration, accelerated by the Highland clearances from the 18th century onward, then layered in Gaelic loanwords and phonetic features on top of all that. The result is something that sounds, to many outsiders, less like English and more like a foreign language. One online commenter put it memorably, "The abominable Glaswegian patois is much more closely related to Klingon than to English. Total communication breakdown guaranteed, that's an exaggeration, obviously, but the specific features that make the accent so challenging are worth understanding in detail." The most famous is the glottal stop. Glaswegians routinely drop the T sound in the middle and ends of words, so water bottle becomes wa'r bowl, butter becomes bahur, and right becomes rye. This isn't a modern development either. A visitor to Glasgow in 1892 observed locals saying, "Pass the wa'r bowl, Mr. Payerson," and found it completely baffling. Linguists have documented that working class Glaswegian speakers use T-glottaling in 93% of conversations. It's strongly stigmatised by outsiders, yet it's the everyday norm for locals. Then there are the vowel shifts. In Glaswegian, chips becomes cheps, bag becomes beg, and the ow sound gets replaced with oo, so house becomes hoose. There's also th fronting, where this can sound like fis and that can sound like vat. And unlike many English dialects, Glaswegian is rhotic, meaning the R sound is pronounced in all positions. Contrast this with received pronunciation, the prestige accent of British broadcasting, and you begin to understand just how far apart these two varieties of English actually sit. But here's what really throws people off. Standard English, both British and American, uses stress-timed rhythm, where certain syllables are emphasised while others are compressed. Glaswegian runs on syllable-timed rhythm, where syllables carry more even durations. That changes the entire music of the language, which is why Americans often describe the accent as machine gun fast even when a Glaswegian is speaking at a perfectly normal pace. The rhythm itself is alien. Now layer the vocabulary on top of all that. Glasgow's slang differs even from the rest of Scotland. Swally means a drink, scunned means exhausted, and gallus means cheeky, bold, confident. Glaswegians themselves say it's the city summarised in 6 letters. Ginger doesn't mean the spice or the hair colour, it means any fizzy drink. Bampot means an idiot, someone who's done something particularly stupid. And as recently as June 2025, the Oxford English Dictionary added the Scots word shugly, meaning unstable or wobbly, often applied to Glasgow's notoriously shaky subway carriages. These aren't obscure terms. They're everyday language for over 1 million people, and they're completely opaque to anyone who hasn't spent time in the city. That opacity has created some genuinely legendary moments in broadcasting. The BBC Scotland sitcom Rabsy Nesbitt followed an alcoholic Glaswegian philosopher layabout through life's indignities and became a national hit, pulling in 5 million viewers at its peak. But when it was entered into the Montreux Television Awards Festival, the international judges needed English subtitles to understand the English dialogue. The show was self-aware about this. In one episode, Rab travels to London and subtitles appear on screen to translate his own speech, a joke about the very real incomprehension his accent provokes everywhere he goes. Then there's the sketch that might be the single most perfect illustration of this whole phenomenon. In 2010, the BBC Scotland comedy show Burnistone aired a bit about two Glaswegian men trapped in a voice recognition elevator. They press a button and say 11. The system responds, "I'm sorry, could you repeat that?" They say it again, and again. Their accent transforms the word into something the technology simply cannot process. The sketch went viral, racking up millions of views because it captured something everyone recognised. Technology, like much of the English-speaking world, was not built for Glaswegian. But that's where the story takes a turn, because while the world was struggling to understand Glasgow, Glasgow was producing some of the most powerful English-language literature of the past 30 years. In 1994, James Kelman won the Booker Prize for How Late It Was. How Late, a novel written largely in Glaswegian dialect. Some judges were reportedly furious. One called it literary vandalism. But Kelman had done something radical. He'd put the voice of working-class Glasgow on the page and dared the literary establishment to take it seriously. It was a tradition with deep roots, from Robert Burns, who 2 centuries earlier had legitimised Scots as a literary language, to Kelman, who dragged that tradition into the post-industrial city and refused to apologise for it. 26 years later, Douglas Stewart did the same thing. His 2020 novel Shuggie Bain, set in the 1980s post-industrial Glasgow, was written in authentic Glaswegian dialect and won the Booker Prize. It went on to sell over 1.5 million copies globally. Stewart said that reading Kelman's novel as a young man changed his life. It was, he said, one of the first times I saw my people, my dialect, on the page. And that gets to the heart of why this matters. The Glaswegian accent has been mocked, subtitled, redubbed and dismissed as unsuitable for educated contexts. A 1946 Scottish Education Department report said exactly that, promoting standard English and treating Scots as something to be trained out of children. For decades there was genuine linguistic insecurity, with young Glaswegians viewing their own speech as slang rather than a distinct and legitimate variety. The patter hasn't disappeared though, it's adapted. Social media has become a new home for Glaswegian dialect, with users sharing the language through memes, videos and local content. The accent is changing, absorbing influences from television and the internet, but as a linguist from the University of Glasgow's Sounds of the City project have noted, those changes do not make it any less distinctive. There is something about Glasgow, they observed, that takes in aspects that work for it and rejects the rest. Billy Connolly, the Big Yin, Glasgow's most famous son, once reflected on growing up in the city's shipyards. "I learned how men talk to one another," he said, "and how merciless Glasgow humour can be. It has made an indelible mark on me. That indelible mark is the patter. It's not broken English, it's not bad English. It is, as 1.5 million speakers and 2 Booker Prize winners will attest, a way of seeing the world that simply sounds like nowhere else on earth. And if you can't understand it, well, there's always subtitles."